Ladies and gentlemen, children of all ages, welcome to the first Jank Diver Gaming Peasant Cube update of 2025 featuring Aetherdrift. Let's put our foot on the gas, cause somebody's gotta do it and cruise through these changes. Remember that Tim, myself, and now limited level ups Danelius do a Peasant Cube set review as a bonus episode of the Jank Tank. So go check out that if you want to hear our full thoughts. Additionally, don't forget to do the algorithm stuff and like, comment, subscribe, and most importantly, come join the Jank Diver Gaming Discord and come play this and other great cubes through the Arena client. Starting off in white, we're going to cut Essence Reliquary for Glory Heath Lynx. Lynx was the most obvious inclusion in the entire set, so really it was just a matter of what to cut. Reliquary, as predicted when we offered to include it, kind of has the dual problem of creating really unfun game states with the free loops, while also encouraging people to draft or play poorly by leaning too heavily on it. And that's in addition to the Journey to Nowhere combo that only had to show up one time for people to start complaining about it. The other change in white is swapping Triplicate Spirits for Nesting Bot. We aren't sure how impactful the bot will be, but incidental artifact triggers have been pretty effective since we made that swap in our blue-white section to an artifact synergy. Due to some other structural changes in the update, we decided we want to trim one of our Army in a Can type cards, so Triplicate Spirits is one of the most volatile given that it ranges from something on the power level of Battle Screech that we don't run to 6 mana for 3/3 worth of stats. Moving into blue, we're going to try swapping Repulse for Roadside Blowout. I'm not really sold on this one, but this card hitting a 1-drop will make it super efficient, which might offset the sorcery's speed nature of it. I'm a bit worried it's going to be extremely brutal into a few specific cards, such as Heartfare Hero, my beloved, while being generically worse than Repulse, but we do like to try the new card. Izzet has been fairly dominant in our cube lately. Shocking, I know. So we're trimming some of the support cards around the deck. Terror is generally worse than Eddy Merc Crab, but having 3 of these effects, when accounting for Hearth Elemental, slotted for a small number of decks kind of feels unnecessary. We're going to try the Bat Song as our pretend to be Sam Black signpost. This card's been fairly powerful in several other environments and supports some cards like Mindless Conscription that can be a little difficult to activate. Murmuring Mystic coming back was a mistake. The card's been super dominant since its return, and it's rather difficult to kill, especially for non-black decks, while being a huge roadblock as well as a must-answer threat. Behold the Multiverse is sort of a placeholder swap until we decide on a more long-term solution, but the card's been rock solid through various iterations of the cube. Case the Filch Falcon was a cool card, but it's a bit too easy to enable, and having a 4/4 flyer that eventually cycles via the clue as early as turn 3 didn't seem reasonable. Floodpit's Drowner was exceptionally impressive in Duskmourn, and while there's a lot more tokens here in this cube environment, it should still be a solid removal spell tempo creature hybrid card. Moving into black, we're going to start off by cutting Fatal Push. This card's been incredibly efficient, and at Peasant it feels like it's always got the 4 mana value mode available. It turns out the Eternal format playable removal spell is really good. Who'd have thought? Bauble is a nice synergy piece that kills a plethora of small dudes in the cube and should play nicely in this environment. Speaking of synergy, Momentum Breaker is nice as a permanent based removal spell that also dumps into the yard for Delirium, and the life gain should help offset if you're in a close matchup with aggro. Bone Shards is decent, but never feels particularly special outside of Rakdos, which is already in the best removal colors. Unearth is kind of a broken card. We want to cut one of the many reanimation recursion effects in the cube, and all the other ones are more interesting to play with. The Archfiend adds another neg2 mini sweeper effect into black, while also being a large threat and being able to dump itself into the yard on top of having some banger art. There aren't a ton of reanimation effects that cheat this out since it's so expensive, but if you do, it should be impressive, and we even have a new card coming in that can help with that. The cycling as a buyout here is really nice on these more expensive bomby type cards. Priest of the Bloodright was a card that really didn't end up doing anything. This card used to be a pretty good rare, but it's not particularly playable even here at Uncommon. It's a little too expensive to do the Sky Fishery loop type stuff, and the life loss adds up pretty quickly, especially if your opponent's able to efficiently answer the demon. Downwind Ambusher is a card that impressed us pretty heavily in Bloomborough, and we're adding it as another card to help answer the go wide small token strategies, while just being kind of a generically reasonable card. Wriggling Grub never really caught on. There's a lot of value, but Rakdos generally prefers being an early aggressive deck, and this doesn't help it do that, and it's not a particularly good blocker either. The Wreckage Wickerfolk is one of the cards that Danelius got us to try, and it should be a reasonable draw smoother that chips in early damage and carries buffs pretty well. 1-3 isn't crazy impressive as a stat line, but Surveil 2 is approaching draw card, and in some mid to late game scenarios might be functionally draw 2. Red has probably the most changes in the cube overall. We feel like Rabbit Battery continues to be a super anemic card, even with synergies. And so we're glad we get what looks to be a good one-drop in Grease Wrench Goblin. Not a ton to say here. The activate ability is nice smoothing. It pumps itself on the way. It gives red-black a way to trigger Mindless Conscription. This card just seems like it has all the knobs turned correctly for what we want out of a Savannah Lions. Burner Rocket's a card I found super interesting, but I'm not convinced it's great. We're going to give it a shot, since if you can get some value outside of it being a 2-mana combat trick, it could end up being pretty decent. This is one that's very much a test card though, so don't be surprised if this gets removed either in the next large update or even a mid-season update should it end up being really bad. Glassworks for Outpace Oblivion should be close to a strict upgrade. It's better removal for the same mana, and honestly, how often does Shattered Yard do more than 2 damage? Outpace Oblivion even dumps itself into the yard for things like Delirium or Recursion. Unholy Heat is just Swords to Plowshares most of the time. It's somehow always on and just nuking giant green dudes from orbit for 1 mana. Galvanic is possibly even better since it can go forward to the dome, but it should require a bit of work in most decks to actually enable. We've been meaning to slot in Synthesizer for several updates and just not gotten around to it. We also decided we wanted to trim one of the red steel effects, since these are such swingy cards that really contribute to Rakdos being one of the cube's best decks. And we have 3 of them. Captor was the most specifically Rakdos of the 3 of them, so it's going to be the card that gets the axe, since the other 2 find their way into generic aggro decks. Finally, we have 2 changes that I want to discuss together, and these are the red sweepers. We've been on the one-sided ones for a while, and it feels like they just do too much and leverage Izzet being able to have early tempo curves, but also giving the deck a strong late game. Rouse in particular has been backbreaking, and it's one of Red's best cards. We're going to leave a sweeper in red, but since Fuel the Flames isn't one-sided, you will lose your Pyromancer and Mischievous Mystic value if you pull the trigger. Our other swap will be for Abrade, and this is just to add a floodgate on the artifact stuff, as many of those cards in that space are difficult to interact with, and we like to have counterplay to things we put in our cube. Let's take a quick pit stop in green before making our final lap when we get to multicolor and colorless cards. Fair's Band Brawler was temporarily bought in, but we're super excited for Autarch Mammoth. Card's obviously powerful, it's great to recur, and while Brawler has been good, it's the least inspiring or important of the 6 drops we run. And okay, Dredger's Insight is a strict upgrade over Grapple, since you do have to select a card that you mill and not gain access to your entire graveyard. But being a permanent, giving you some life gain, and overall just the package of card should end up being a better card overall. Chalk Outline has generally not been needed for the green-black graveyard decks. Roots covers that role better for the specific decks, and for generic value, we picked up Duskmourn's Cadaver Lab, which has been a nice engine that is self-enabling. Earth Rumbler is thick, and will provide a way to trigger Roots as many times in a turn as you want. This card has already been impressive in the first few days of the retail set, and sometimes keyword big just gets there, and oh yeah, this has other keywords too, and they're all good. Really disappointed that Boon Satyr didn't get there. Me and Tim have always had a soft spot for the card as far back as original Theros, but it just doesn't quite get there even with the uncommons these days. We're going to give Fang Guardian a shot. It won't give permanent stats, but should play generically better, at least until the cowards decide to give us Briarthorn or something power crept from it. Okay, someone please explain to me how this art isn't a 5-color card art. Doesn't make any sense. It completely perplexes me. That being said, it is the card I'm going to use for the multicolor section, because this was clearly meant to be multicolor art. Oh, also, have I mentioned Rutstein is cracked? If you didn't know that, it is. This card is a great green-black card, even in our mainline cube. Rise of the Witch King has looked good in other cubes that we've played, and it's got to be a step down from obvious best card in the cube that Rutstein was, even though it looks like a very powerful card when we've seen it. Despite me saying it during the podcast that this would never happen, Tim talked me into cutting Hero of the Dunes for the old Doom Buggy. It has a lot of flexibility, reanimating an Archfiend's Vessel or Mishra's Bauble on the cheap end while also being able to hit the big expensive things if you draw this on 7 or 8 mana, and it also hits all the stuff in between. I'm not sure how overall good it is, but it also loops Core Skyfisher for 4 mana instead of 5, so there's that. Beast Rider is kind of a wild stat line. The untap ability is unprecedented at this rarity as far as I'm aware, and the pump ability it gives your team should be more relevant than 5 mana to make one guy most of the time. Warlord definitely wasn't a bad card, but this one is super exciting. Sky Serpent Seeker seemed like an obvious must-play card, so the question was just what we were cutting. We settled on Emoti since Repulsive Mutation is fairly untouchable, and Emoti being a value card that also demands an answer unless you want to risk your opponent curving into a 6+ card that lets them cascade, just felt like an easy enough cut. It's a great card, but something had to go, and we are emotionally attached to Colossal Sky Turtle. Denethor was a very powerful card. Embalmed Descendant is very likely worse, but it's super interesting. It's got a good stat line totaling 3/4. It's great with Skyfisher, Vesperal Arc, Recursion Synergy type stuff. And the upside of becoming another Bastion of Remembrance Blood Artist effect is probably the best of the generic speed upsides. Everything on this card is pretty sweet, except for the art. All right, just a couple of lands and we're done. Night Market's an easy include. Edgewall Inn has its moments, but cycling should be better on average, as we've seen from stuff like the Triomes in more powerful environments. And then finally, Atraxa Skitterfang is a card that I'm a fan of, but doesn't really see any play. Avishkar Raceway seems like a nice payoff for being a monocolored, aggressively slanted deck. Even if I'm not sure you're going to be able to fit this into your mana base in too many decks. And we've reached the finish line. Thanks for sticking around for those still here. I'm trying a new ending panel with a playmat design that Tim's been working on, so let me know what you think. Remember that the best way to support Jank Diver Gaming is to join our Discord server and come play. I've posted the schedule on the right. We play our mainline cube on Wednesday and Sunday evenings at 7:30. Variety cubes Saturday at 10:30 a.m. and Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Our Peasant Cube that this update covers fires on Saturdays at 2:30 p.m. and Player's Choice Cubes happen Fridays at 7:30 p.m. These are all Eastern Standard Time, but we've started using Discord timestamps to help people coordinate these times. Check out more of our great content over at Jank Diver Gaming YouTube channel. Find me, Tim, Chris, and occasionally Denelius or another guest on the Jank Tank podcast. And I can sometimes be found streaming on twitch.tv/Teld Talks.